So we know we shouldn't anger our children. We know we should be pointing them to the scriptures. And we know that we should, as a parent, as a father in particular, be providing for our family.
So done deal. We got the game plan.
Yeah, we got the game plan.
All right, Rob. So throughout this whole season, we've been talking about tension, and we've been talking about some concepts. The 3 layers of tension, and we keep coming back to this premise of that this fundamental tension is between surrender and control. And I think there's probably some people that want some more unpacking on, well, what does this look like in real life? So what is the most real pressing issue that you want to unpack and apply this to?
Well, I think parenting rises to the surface. I've got 4 kids and quite a bit of tension in trying to balance all their various activities. I don't know about you, but parenting and thinking about parenting takes up a lot of my time.
Absolutely. I have 3 of my own, and I don't feel like you ever, well, what we talk about is you never have the classic sign of being caught in the tension is that you're restless, right? And so
Right.
there's a lot of restlessness associated with that topic. So I think that's a great one. You've been thinking about it a little bit. I mean, if you had to summarize parenting in one word and how you're feeling it right now, what would you say?
Right now it's sleeplessness. I mean, I am losing sleep, not for physical reasons, not because kids are screaming and diapers need to be changed, but just thinking about my older children and my tweens and their transitions between childhood and adulthood. It's a complex time, and watching them navigate that transition is hard, and helping them navigate that transition is hard. We were always told, wait until they get a little older. Little kids, little problems, big kids, big problems, and I'm starting to see that more and more.
It definitely, for me, I have one who's now gone to college, so there was definitely a step change in difficulty, I thought, once they hit a certain age in terms of parenting. And by the way, if you're not a parent, I still think this is a great episode in terms of connecting the dots and really seeing the connection to the layers. So
Hopefully
Rob,
we're going to get practical.
I think we're going to get very practical. So you ready to dive in?
Let's go.
Welcome to A World in Tension podcast, a place where we examine the opposing pulls and struggles of life to uncover clarity, purpose, and practical solutions. Come join us as we seek to get comfortable facing the uncomfortable. This is A World in Tension.
All right, Neil. So Scripture is sometimes silent on certain things. Have you noticed that? Some of the things we wish it probably wasn't silent on too.
Yeah, like we want it to be super prescriptive, right?
We want it to be black and white.
Yeah.
Yeah. We don't want a lot of gray. We would like for God to say, do this, don't do that. But I don't find that Scripture is very prescriptive when it comes to parenting. I would say it certainly lays out the fact that we have a responsibility as parents.
Absolutely.
But in this modern world, it doesn't give us a lot of guidance specifically on what is and isn't appropriate.
I agree.
So, like for instance, we know in Proverbs 22:6 it says, "Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it." So, as a Christian, I think that tells me that I should be teaching my children Christian values. And obviously that's all of Scripture.
Yeah, and that verse kind of gets me a little bit too, because I feel like people really want to hold on to that as like a 100% guaranteed promise, and you realize as your kids get older how much you can do your part, but it is on them.
No, it is. That is not a guarantee.
No, that is not a promise. So if you're one of those parents that thinks that is, and you have a 2-year-old, like you got to do your role, but that's not a guarantee.
No, that's a directive for the parent. It doesn't guarantee that the child's going to end up where you want the child to end up.
That's a great way of saying it. It's a directive for the parent.
Right.
I like it.
Another one is Ephesians 6:4. Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. So, again, pointing to the discipline and instruction of the Lord. I would say instruction of the Lord is often the Scripture, teachings of the church, etc. So, I take that as a father. We shouldn't be, exasperating our children, and that we should be bringing them to church and bringing them to the Word.
Yeah, not crushing their spirit. I think that's a big thing that we often do as parents too often, right? Like, you must do these things, but I forget you're a person like me who's flawed. But yeah, that's a classic.
Let's go with one more, and this one's tough. But if anyone doesn't provide for his own, and especially his own household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. That sounds exciting.
Yeah, it makes you feel great, right?
Right.
You horrible provider.
Yeah. Well, if you're down on your luck and you're not providing, that would be a tough verse to deal with. But again, okay, so we know we shouldn't anger our children. We know we should be pointing them to the Scriptures, and we know that we should, as a parent, as a father in particular, be providing for our family.
So done deal. We got the game plan.
Yeah, we got the game plan. Just do it all right. But this does not address the things that I wrestle with every day.
Come on, Rob.
So I can't tell you how many phone conversations I've had. Conversations about phones that I've had in the last year, either with my oldest child or with my wife or with my friends who are wondering when they should get their kid a phone and what kind of phone and what that phone should allow them to do. We've got you and I talked about some S's, right? Mm-hmm. So schooling, that's a big one.
Huge one.
Homeschool, private school, public school, during COVID, no school. So,
yep.
Sports.
Yep.
Social media, that's not up there, but that's a fifth S.
Yeah.
Social media.
Social media and screens go hand in hand.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Right. Okay. Space. So like freedom, how much space do you give your kids? Do you let them run wild, or do you rein them in? I came from the generation, I suspect you did too, where you came home when the street lights came on, and you really weren't encouraged to be inside. It was go outside and play with your friends in the neighborhood, and don't come home until it's dark.
Yeah, well, and that's one of those ones that the space one is a good example of, like, people paint it to be so easy. Like, as the child gets older, you just let out the rope, right? You just give them more freedom. But in reality, it doesn't work that cleanly, right? There's moments where you have to yank in the rope pretty tight on older child as far as, taking away from some of their privileges and responsibilities. And there's other times where you let the rope go out further and maybe earlier than you think, for depending on the scenario.
Yeah, but there's some things about that I don't get. There's a trend in my teenage patient base where I have a lot of parents tell me their teenage kids don't want to drive. So what's going on there? I remember, like, I turned 16 at at 7:59 a.m. I was ready to go out the door and get my driver's license, and now I'm hearing that teenagers don't want the freedom. They don't want to drive. They don't want the responsibility. I don't know what all that's about, but
I don't. There's probably a lot to that connected to social media and, like, connecting in the real world. But let's really get into some of these, right? Like, what do you want? You want to start with school?
Yeah, let's be practical here, and let's see how some of our constructs and how some of the things that we've talked about, the various layers of tension, let's see how they plug into some of these parenting tensions. So let's start with schooling. Schooling is a big one in certain circles, how to school your kids. So, briefly, let's kind of define it. So there's folks that ascribe mainly to homeschooling. And then you have folks that are into public school. And then I would say you have folks that are into private school, and private school could even be subdivided. It can be sort of a non-parochial private school or a sort of a religious affiliation private school or a Christian private school. So lots of different views there.
Yeah, and one thing we were talking about, and I think this is a key indicator of something being off, is if you think one of those options is the absolute way that it must be, and you are doing it right, and others think more highly of you, or you're whatever, those are some indicators that you may be off base. And this is where I want to start to connect some of the conceptual to a real issue. So the real issue is schooling. And what we've been talking about is control and surrender, right? Like fundamentally, the thing we need to do is surrender to God. It's a spiritual issue instead of trying to control things. Well, if you recall back to our conversation about layers, right? There's the layers where we seek to control and push out are two. One, which is our natural internal tension, which is this battle between heart and mind. So it's the logical and the emotional battle, the internal voice.
That's where you're analyzing, look, should I be homeschooling or should I be sending them to school X?
Yeah, because, well, financially it makes sense. Or
Right.
no, his spiritual well-being, I just like the feel of it, right?
That's the head and the heart.
Yeah, that's the head and heart battling. And then there's the external outer layer, which is, what will people think of me, like, let's just say in the church? What will others think of me if I don't homeschool them? That's an external tension that you're worried about. So what we're trying to connect here is why we keep coming back to control and surrender is, in all of these issues, don't get caught out on the outer layers. Focus on the inner layer of what you need to surrender to God. So I just wanted to kind of connect that to the construct. So let's walk through more issues there with schooling. Like I talked about what people may think of you as a homeschooler or whatever, but like let's take another issue. Like, what's something else that you wrestle with in the whole schooling decision?
Specific to schooling, do you want to start on the more external?
Wherever you want to go. Like, let's just talk about, because people don't classify them in these layers. And again, we're trying to classify them to help people. So just name what you've been wrestling with or battling with in terms of schooling that in your life. Like,
right. I have two middle schoolers. I've got an 8th grader and a 6th grader, and both of them were homeschooled in elementary school and have transitioned to a private school for middle school, and that's been quite a transition. The circles that they ran in were circles that were, I would say, more parent influenced than student influenced, and so there's a lot of little things that they don't know, they don't understand. So, social media is foreign to them. Certain phrases and sayings and slang and modern lingo are completely foreign to them.
So there's this kind of battle going on between how much do I expose my kids to the world versus how much I kind of shelter them, right? In those kind of three pieces. It almost feels like a continuum when I think about it. Like, homeschooled is the most protected. Then you have the Christian school, which
Correct.
is semi-protected.
And then you have,
Then you have public school, which is right. Like, we're just throwing them out into the world, right?
Yeah, and I would say that the influences of pop culture, increase as you move, from, more protected to less protected, or
So
isolated.
let's unpack each one of those. What are some of the fallacies we could tell ourselves by picking a side? So let's just start from the outside. Public school. We send our kids to, and again, I want to be clear here. We're not saying, I think the right answer is finding it's kid specific, and are you really surrendering this to God? But let's pick out some of the, I'm holding on to why this is the best answer. So public school, why is that the best answer?
Well, I mean, I think the conversation would center on, you know, the idea of being a light unto the world, sending your kid into the mission field, allowing your child to have experiences while you can, you know, talk to them while they're in your home and you can process what they're experiencing with them, as opposed to sending them into a high school or a college situation where they've never been exposed to that and expecting them to just jump right in and figure it all out. So, you know, I think there are some, you know, merits to public school that are easily, you know, made. I think a lot of financial, you know, I mean, financial is a huge deal. I mean, not everybody, you know, can afford a private school, and not everybody feels like they have the ability to homeschool their children. So, what options do you have? You know?
Yeah, and so let's go to the other extreme then. So, homeschooling. Why may someone think that that's the best option? I mean, I think what I see is that it's largely about making sure their child is getting educated. Like, part of your role as a parent,
right,
is not only to educate them, it's to educate them in all things, essentially. And that doesn't mean you don't get help, but it's really making sure that spiritual focus is central and that it's not lost.
Not to belittle certain interpretations of Proverbs 22:6, which we talked about, but some people, you know, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. They use that as a prescription for homeschooling, that, you know, you need to be teaching your child. And I think that's a way to look at it. I'm not sure that's the only way to look at that. I think that's more in regards to their spiritual walk, their spiritual life, than I think it is about their academic life. But there's certainly probably some crossover.
And then the private school option. I mean, it's kind of the in between, right? It's this nice.
It is.
It's this nice balance between putting them out in the world, but it's kind of safe, but I don't have to do the full responsibility of the.
And I think the huge issue there is apathy.
Yeah.
I mean, I think you run the risk of going, okay, I've got it taken care of. I'm a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and I can just sort of step back and, you know, let it ride. But that's not the case. I mean, that, you know, a private Christian school has everything that a public school has.
So what's the problem? And I want to move to another topic, but like, just to put this one to rest, what's the problem with saying that one of those is the best? Like, there's a difference between saying, for my child and each one, I think this is the best option, versus this is the best option.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't go any further than acknowledging that there just isn't a scriptural mandate for one mode of schooling versus another. I just can't get there from here with the Bible. I can't get to one being right and one being wrong, or one being black and one being white. So
more from a practical perspective, you are surrendering, and by surrendering it's not this one time, I'm going to surrender the school decision for my kid. No, it's this ongoing surrendering to God of decisions as you're making them to, you know, essentially what is going to be most glorifying to God, and what is going to be allow that child and us as a family to be a witness in this world, right? Yeah. I mean, that's the essence of surrender. Oh, I mean, I've known, you know, 3 elders in a church that each did one of the 3 things we've talked about: homeschooling, private Christian schooling, and public schooling. Yeah. And so let's switch to sports, because I really like sports. Yeah, and I actually think this would be fun because you and I don't always agree on this topic. Yes. So. Yeah. So I'll just lay my cards out. I am a big fan of sports. I played soccer in college. I completely value the work ethic, the grit. I think you get a taste of grit that you can't get there's a physical grit that just helps you in so many areas of life. in terms of understanding, really working hard and pushing yourself beyond what you think what is possible, the teamwork, the camaraderie, the ability to kind of take some hits both verbally and physically and keep going on with life. So I think there's tons of positives. Now, obviously, I've also been around, youth sports at its ugliest with, everyone thinking their child is going to be the next, star athlete and
the next David Beckham.
Yeah, and how much all of that kind of connects to what we're talking about here. They're worried about how their kid is just going to be this, they're going to live vicariously through their kid. This is this external tension of how great their kid is, or
the yellers and the screamers on the sideline.
Yes, or internally they're wrestling with, I never delivered at this level, but they have an added gift that I didn't have, and I'm going to push them. That's my responsibility to push them to their far. So I've seen a lot of the ugliness. But so what's your take on sports?
Well, I like sports. Nothing against sports, but I've seen sports essentially divide families. I've seen situations where parents got to their junior and senior year with a 3-sport athlete who burned out before they ever made it to college. I've seen situations where 3-sport athletes, went to college on a scholarship and quit after the first year because they were injured or burned out. And so, I look at a lot of sports, especially the team sports, as sometimes a bit of a dead end. Now, athletic ability is something that I think should go with us for our whole life. So, I think some of them, have more of a sort of a future than others. I think the pool of future professional football players is much smaller than the pool of, future golfers or runners or tennis players. So I'm certainly all about, athletics. But I think we've seen families give up a lot of time with the advent of select and travel ball. I just hear a lot of families that are going nonstop.
Yeah, and I've lived that too, and how it's sacrificed. I'll tell you a few things it's caused issues with that. I sometimes question if it's the right thing, right? So separation of everyone during dinner time, right? It usually always happens. Usually has a conflict with a church, whether Sunday or Wednesday evening. There's out-of-town travel. Again, it's the separation of the family. One parent goes, another parent stays. So there's certainly a lot of that you have to grapple with. And let me make one other comment too. To me, this isn't just about athletics, because maybe your kid isn't athletically gifted, right?
Right.
So to me, it's also about just
anything. It could
some
be,
ability. Maybe there may be a musical genius.
Right.
Or acting.
Or not a musical genius, but you're trying to make them a musical genius.
Exactly.
Right.
Or, they're very theatrical or whatever. But it's about getting behind that gift that your kid has and trying to see where that goes. So, I laid out some of the real tensions of the external and the internal. What do you think are some more battles that are going on with that whole arena, besides living vicariously? Do you think there's anything else that people are grappling with, heart and mind, or?
Yeah, I would say that there's probably, and I guess I'm speaking from personal experience, but there's a lot that we do for our kids because we want our kids to fit in. We don't want our kids to be left behind or left out. And so, we may look at, a social circle in a school or in a church and think, oh, I would like my kid to be a part of that or feel comfortable in that arena. And so, we think, oh, that means I've got to do this.
Right, which you're identifying. That's an external tension.
Right.
It's what others think about my kid or me. Sometimes we put it off on our kid, what they'll think about my kid, but we're thinking, what will the parents think about me too? Right. No, so that's a great issue. I think internally there's too the debate of maybe logically, how much is this going to cost?
Right.
Is it worth it? hey, I've heard it both sides. This is way too expensive, or I've heard, if this is my kid's dream, I'm gonna do everything I can to back it financially. I've heard both of those statements.
Well, and I think people look at, the potential for a college scholarship as, a worthwhile. I mean, college is expensive nowadays. So if you can invest 10 grand in your kid in high school and it gets them a $30,000 or $40,000 a year college scholarship, then it's a good ROI.
Absolutely. So let's talk about surrender. And I think I have a example here because this is something I really personally wrestled with. So my son is a pretty gifted runner, and I think he could have run collegiately. So we had a discussion probably his freshman year of high school, and we just said, look, if you want to run collegiately, you got to start working now because with running, it's just like shaving time off, right?
Seconds.
Yeah. So you got to start now. But here's the thing: if you want to do that, you got to love it. Like, because if you don't love it, you're going to get to college and you're now going to have this scholarship or whatever, and then you're going to chuck it. And so it's do you love this? And part of the reason why you love it is because you think God has made you for this and you want to bring glory to him through it. And we had those conversations, and so my son had to wrestle with what is he chasing after in his heart and the external influences, but also me, hey, what if you don't have any collegiate athletes? Are you going to be good with that? Even though you see talent in them, are you, Neil, going to be good with that? And that was the dying I had to do to myself to say, look, I back you, whatever you want to do. I'm just telling you the facts here. You got to make a decision, right? And either way you want to go, I'm on your team.
Now, that's really a beautiful example, Neil. That really drives it home for me in a very real way what surrender looks like. I mean, you just brought up two of the most important points I would make about what surrender looks like in some of these topics, and that is, are you going to do this, or do you enjoy this or feel called to this in such a way that it is something you feel like you can glorify God with? I mean, and that's surrender. I mean, and that's looking at it in a healthy way, because if the answer is yes, that's amazing. I mean, think about how many people have watched Chariots of Fire, and have had something very meaningful come out of that experience, right? And so someone can certainly glorify God with their athletic abilities. And if that's, as a parent, if that's your child, then you want to be able to support them in that.
Okay, so we've covered two topics pretty deep. I think that we mentioned like screens and social media and space, which we could definitely get into. I don't know that we're going to be able to get into it on this one.
Well, it's hard because I could talk for a whole episode just about sports and tensions there, or school and tensions there. I mean, there's so much you could unpack, but we're not here to unpack the specific issues. We're here to unpack the tensions that are within those issues and how we can deal with them.
Exactly. I mean, so let's, as we're wrapping it up, what do we want because the listener, I mean, you're going to hear, it's good to hear stories and like how people dealt with things and how we're thinking through it, but ultimately you got to take this and wrestle with what is going on in your life. So, and it could be about something we haven't even touched yet related to parenting. I mean, there could be some drug use problem, right? Whatever. But so what do you think are some practical things that someone can, we talk about like markers and
this is where I was going to get into the markers conversation, because I think this is a great example of looking for those markers where you feel the external tensions, and then doing the deep dive to figure out, okay, what's the issue here?
So let's
get real specific.
Yeah, what's a marker of external tension that you mean? What?
All right, so let's use the specific example of, I'm seeing that my child isn't thriving in the circle of individuals in their class that are the elite athletes, I have a desire. Let's say I have a desire for my child to fit in to that group. I've envisioned my kid being an athlete, a student athlete, or a jock, or whatever it is.
You want your kid to be the cool kid.
Yeah, the cool kid in the sports, right? And so I'm it's not happening, and so I'm upset about that, and it's causing tension in my life because I don't know what to do about it. So let's use that as an example. I'm not saying that's even a personal example, but I could certainly sense that, or I've felt that, at times.
Yeah. So you're worried about other people. That's the external bit. So then let's take that same example of how does that that natural internal tension that's between your heart and mind, the inner discussion, how do you think you could diagnose something going on there related to that issue? I mean, like one thing I think about is it probably starts to evoke certain memories about, it's not about your kid, it's about you. Mm-hmm. It starts to evoke those things, and
I know what it felt like
how
to
you
not
felt.
fit in with the guys on the golf team or whatever it was.
So now I'm an older, wiser person with more knowledge. So I'm going to use my head to compensate for that feeling and do something about it for my kids. I'm going to set up. Maybe you honestly try to make more money so your kid has a better car. You can host parties. I mean, people
hire
can
a private coach.
Yeah, people exactly. Mm-hmm. You can go to great lengths to now compensate that. So okay, we're going into the layers, and you start to go. You should start saying this feels off. Mm-hmm. And so now we get into that spiritual internal layer, which is always what we've been saying is about control and surrender, mm-hmm. right? So all those things we've talked about are control, right? You're trying to control it for whatever reason. So how would someone surrender that? How do they surrender it? What do you think?
Well, I mean, it's in acknowledging that we serve a sovereign Lord who has a perfect plan for our child, and and knows their days, and knows their heart, and knows what they're going to be good at and what they're not going to be good at, and ultimately it's not in our hands, right? And it's our job to point them to scriptures that teach them that, and as we see them struggling, we've got to be mature enough to say, okay, I need to let go of this. My child is not me. They may not be dealing with the same thoughts and, fears and concerns that I had as a kid. They may be moving down a different path, right? Yeah. And so we just need to, I think, do something similar to what you did with your oldest, which is, paint the picture for them. Do you enjoy this? Is this what you want? If it is, we can work through the details of how to become better at it. But if this isn't something that you want, then, we just want to try to help you find the things that God has gifted you with and then develop them so that you can glorify God with those things, with those gifts.
That's a great summary. So our job is to help our kids to discover that, mm-hmm. and to do the continual work of it and not check out. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, realize they could choose very foolish pathways or just go contrary to your advice. I remember on another episode you said, man, wouldn't it be the coolest thing if your kid just showed up one day and goes, Dad, just fill me with your insights and wisdom. Tell me what I need to do here. But what's funny about that, because actually that's what surrender is for us. Mm-hmm. That's what we need to do to God our Father. We need to say, oh, just instruct me. I trust you. Lead me. Guide me.
Well, we talked about in the episode on faith and works about how those two things that are seemingly in tension with one another actually can move closer together when we are surrendered to God, and God is essentially towing the line and not us. And then all of a sudden those two things, kind of move back in importance as God moves up in importance, and those two things actually move closer together. And I think that can be the case with schooling or with sports.
No, I'm glad you said that, because
it's that picture.
Well, but what's so beautiful about that practically is it's almost like a paradox. Like the more we surrender, the easier the tensions become, right? But we actually think the surrender is the hard part, right? But the harder part is really trying to fight these tensions to control them all of our lives. That's the hard part. So anyway, well, Rob, this has been a great conversation. I'm glad you wanted to tee up parenting, and I think we started to scratch at it, but hopefully it gives the listener a sense of how to really apply these layers and how to surrender.
Yeah, this has been good timing. I mean, as I think just about how much tension I'm dealing with in parenting, this is come at a good time.
Awesome.
I'm going to go back and listen to it so I can be encouraged to surrender more.
That can't ask for anything more. Well, thanks again for listening, and join us next time on A World in Tension.